everybody. I try to get this. Oh, there we go. Happy Valentine's Day. So my husband, hi honey, we met 10 years ago teaching at a high school in Brooklyn, and our love story has been full of warmth and joy and adventure, but I don't know that it would be that entertaining for you, or really anyone other than like our future grandchildren, if they're nice. So instead, tonight on this eve of Valentine's Day, I want to tell you about how my parents met in Palma de Mallorca in the summer of 1970. I wasn't there for obvious reasons, but my dad has told me the story so many times that the images are ingrained in my memory, so I want to tell it for you tonight. My mother, Isla, she was born in Finland. She grew up in a small town called Varkaus, and when she was 20, she escaped small town life and moved to Palma de Mallorca, and she got a job at a boutique called Boutique Sandra. It was on the beach, and she designed window displays, and she sold souvenirs and things like that. My father, on the other hand, grew up in Harlem. He was probably one of the only Jewish boys that far uptown. But it was 1970. It was July. He was with his best friend, Tony. They were traveling around Europe, picking up girls, having adventures, things like that. And they found themselves in Palma. And one day, my father's name was Mark. One day, Mark walked into Boutique Sandra, and he saw Isla there, and she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And I know how that sounds. I know that's really cliche. I know, but I think in this case it was accurate. My mom was like a slightly edgier Catherine Deneuve. She was like all pretty eyes and mystery. And when Mark asked her out, she said no. So he bought some shorts instead. And he went back the next day and he asked her out again, and she said no again. She said something like, "I don't date foreigners," which is interesting because she was a foreigner. But oh well. So he went back again and asked her out again, and this became kind of a habit. Mark did have some competition in those days. For one, Lorenzo Santamaria, Spanish rock star who was performing in Palma a lot those days, he had his eye on Isla. But she just couldn't get used to this idea that someone would consider her a groupie or something, so that was the end of that. There was also Jean-Claude, who was a French karate instructor, and he took Isla to bullfights, which she hated. Also, he was a foreigner, so I don't really get that. But in the meantime, Mark made a habit of visiting the boutique at siesta time. Everyone else was asleep. They found some time to be kind of quiet, and he would bring her little poems he'd written. Mark fancied himself kind of a hippie. He had longish hair. He would write poems on the beach. It was the counterculture movement in the U.S. So he really got to know Isla this way. They became close in the days of his vacation. And every day that he came in, he would ask her out, and every day she would say no. And then finally, on the last day of his vacation, right before he was due to fly back to New York, she agreed to go out with him that night. So they were planning to meet outside of a discotheque called Crazy Daisies at 7:30. And Mark showed up at 7, and he began to wait. And 7:30 rolled around, and 8 o'clock, and 9, and 10, and no Isla. At 10:30, she walked in with a couple of girlfriends and said, "I forgot." And she was surprised to see Mark there, but he was undeterred, and luckily nightlife started late, and they went out at 10:30, and they hit up a couple clubs, and they went dancing, and they had a really good time. And he missed his flight the next day. I don't know the details about that, but it's fine. It's fine. So he had this extra day with Isla in Spain, and but he did have to go back to New York eventually. So when he went back, he had to fly back for good. He promised that he would write, and they parted ways. And he flew back to New York. He flew back to his job at IBM and the humdrum of life in New York and just the regular old fall rolling around and the weather starting to get colder. And he just couldn't stop thinking about that Finnish girl who worked at Boutique Sandra. They exchanged a couple of letters, but the last letter he sent went unanswered, so he was just kind of thinking about what to do with his life. So as the weather started to get colder, he decided to quit his job, sell all of his stocks, and buy a ticket back to Spain. And he flew back, and he got to Palma, and he threw his suitcase down on the bed of his hotel, and he raced to the beach to surprise Isla at the boutique. And he got to the boutique, and he kind of peeked around the doorway, and he saw her sitting there. Just no one was in the store. She was kind of staring off into space, sitting on that stool where she always sat behind the counter. And he finally walked in, and she was shocked and happy and breathless. And that's only the beginning of the story. I know it's only the start. I promise I'm ending. It's only the start, but it's the part that was my favorite. It was the part I asked to hear again and again when I was growing up. I can almost see it. If I close my eyes, I can see the boutique. I can peel back the beaded curtains in the doorway, and I can see my mother before she was anyone's mother, sitting there, lost in thought. And this is what I wish I had a photograph of, her face before the rest of her life began. Thank you.